Hey guys, John coming to you from Evolve Custom Rod Shops, showing you another G2 grip build. This is with the blade reel seat. Both the arrow and the blade reel seats that I'm using have the CCT carbon technology in them. Just awesome reel seats. The blade is set up for a casting where the arrow is set up for spinning. I'm going to show you a couple different techniques in this video that I didn't show you in the other one. Number one, we need to find out winding check size. Now, usually when you go to build a rod, you order your winding checks with all the components, or you have them on hand, whatever works for you. I generally order mine for the rod that I'm doing, and I have enough rods or have done enough to know what to use. But when you're a new rod builder, this can be a daunting task. At least it was for me. And you need to measure everything out. It's very simple. A couple quick measurements, a couple simple tools, and you can do this. So I'm doing a 12-inch handle here. The first thing I need to know is, where's my rear grip going to go on the fishing rod? So I take my rear grip, set it up to the rod blank, and mark it. Now, if you don't have the grip at hand, like I do here, notice I went to the length of the grip and then just worked backwards. One thing cool about these G2 split grips is both of these have a grip length of 3.5 inches. So if you're doing a 9-inch handle, you just come 3.5 inches back from 9 inches and go forward from the butt 3.5 inches. Makes for a real simple thing, and that's how you can take your measurements on the rod blank before you ever get the extra components. Now, if you're ordering it all together, sometimes your suppliers can actually test fit everything for you. Pull out my calipers. First thing I'm going to do is mic it at 3.5 inches up. This is going to give me just under 12. So I know I'm going to be using a 12 there. Now this one up here was just below 11.5. And because these winding checks come in half sizes, I might have been able to go with 11.5. But just for ease, I just ordered two 12s. So now what we're doing is we're marking the front of the reel seat. So this connects to the back of the handle, the 12-inch mark on the handle. And then we're marking the front of it because we need to take a measurement up front. And as you can see, that's at 11.17, 11.18. That's for the winding check that goes underneath the ultralock hood. And what that's going to do is basically cover the gap between the trim on the ultralock hood and the rod blank. So we're going to test that, fit everything now. Make sure sizing's correct, everything like that. As I move this size 12 winding check back, it's a near perfect fit. It won't go off the end of the rod, and there's not a lot of slop in there at all. Even when I move it forward, there is the front winding check, which fits perfectly. So now we're going to remount the grips, make sure they fit. We're going to put everything together before we do any glue up. Make sure everything is where it needs to be. Now I've not built the arbors for the reel seat yet. but that'll come once I start the glue up. I'm extremely happy with this. Double check my measurements. Very important to do. There you go. Dry fit. Next step I want to do is I take some 5-minute epoxy. You're going to mix this stuff until it's one solid color. This is a Unilock hood. What I'm doing is I'm putting epoxy around the top of it. This is 3 to 4 pieces depending if you get the trim ring or not. I have not done a trim ring yet, so I have not used a trim ring, but I'm just doing the Unilock hood. So once I get the epoxy on the Unilock hood, I'll set that off to the side. I'll grab the carbon sleeve and the inner trim of the Unilock hood. I'll start applying epoxy to that. Spin those two components together. And then grab the Unilock hood and start spinning that on. Now, if I feel like I don't have enough epoxy on there, while I still have it out some, I'll add a little bit more. It's not going to need a whole bunch, but I like to have enough in there. Now, the 5-minute epoxy, depending on how much hardener you put in there, can set up pretty quickly. And there is a very short window of working time. So don't think you can walk away from 5-minute epoxy. I only use it for small stuff like this because it sets up so quickly. In a pinch, I'll use it on grips if I know what I'm doing and it's just a simple grip install. Other than that, I'll use standard paste epoxy and just wait. Now what I'm doing is putting epoxy on the inside front of the blade reel seat. That way when I push my carbon insert into it, it'll get plenty of epoxy between the reel seat and the carbon insert. I'm also putting some epoxy on the back of the carbon insert where it sits into the back of the reel seat. What this is going to do is just give it an additional bond. Very important. This will also save me a step when I'm gluing up with my paste epoxy because this will already be in place. And I'll be less likely to have something move on me. I'm also going to put the trim ring that goes in between the G2 reel seat, between the G2 grip and the CCT reel seat. Just put a little bit of epoxy on there and just set it in there. Spin it around, make sure you got good coverage. Now for the cleanup. The way I did this, there was very little excess. And just so you know, by this point, the epoxy is becoming hard. So just be aware of that. Okay, next line of action is we need to scuff up the areas where we're going to be gluing. I showed you this before in the last video. I'm just using a 3M abrasive pad, and I'm just taking the sheen off. See how this resin is all crystallized, I'm going to show you a little trick. Sometimes they come in shipped like that. Don't be alarmed. Stick it in the microwave for 15 seconds, and I'm telling you what, it becomes as good as the hardener as far as consistency. It's nice and workable. It's not chunky. Feels great. And as you can imagine, it mixes easier and it's easier to work with. So we're going to mix up our epoxy and start applying it to the rear grip. I've already reamed everything out. Now be careful reaming out the G2 grips. It's very easy to go too far because they ream out very simply, but they're super forgiving. So what I'll do is as I spin on this grip, just make sure I got good coverage. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go a little bit past, that way when I put my winding check on, I can put a little epoxy on the blank and then push the winding check and everything together. So I'll use my paintbrush for this. You want to use a cheap disposable paintbrush because you're not going to want to clean this when it's done. It's no fun. And by putting the epoxy there, the other advantage is you're going to fill in any gaps if you're a quarter millimeter or half a millimeter off on that winding check. That's why I'm not too worried about getting it perfect, because it'll look perfect when it's all said and done. Now, I showed you how to put a sticker on the back of the butt cap of these G2 grips. So now you're just putting the trim ring on and then the butt cap, because I've added a sticker to the tail end of this butt cap as well. On some of your heavier rods, you might need to arbor the end cap, just because the rod blank diameter, but generally you can fill it in with epoxy and that'll work fine. You just need to make sure it stays in place while it hardens. And I'll also put a little around the edge. So I'm putting it on the shaft of the butt cap and also just around the edge. Doesn't take much. Got everything in place. Look, I was just about to do it. I was just about to put the epoxy on for the foregrip without putting the winding check on first. I did that in the last video and I said, see, you can learn from me. But this time I remembered to put the winding check on before I put on the rear grip. I'm calling it a rear grip because it sits behind the real seat. But in this circumstance, it's actually the forward grip. So because I've marked all my lines on here and where everything lines up, I'm going to be able to stop where I need to stop and put the epoxy where I need to put it to make sure everything gets glued into place properly. Double check my measurements again. Move it to where I need to. So I'm using standard set epoxy on this. I'm not using any like 15-minute or something or anything like that. Of course, I'd be willing to try the faster setting paste epoxy, but I'd rather have a little bit of extra time just in case. Because once this glue sets up, I'm not going to touch it. So now we're going to build the arbors for the real seat. Because the diameter of the blank and you have the carbon insert, shouldn't take us too long. Bringing my light over so I can see where I need to clean up, see if I need to do anything, make any adjustments. The other thing is too, these grips, like this blade has an American Tackle logo that sits on the forward facing grip. And because of that, I want to line that up with the top of the real seat. That way everything looks good. The first time I did this video, I didn't realize there was an American Tackle logo until later on. Luckily, it lined up okay. There was no problem with that. Looks good and no harm, no foul. But that was on the rear grip of the Aero G2 grip. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, I'm going to mark where I'm going to put my arbors. That way there's no question and I'm not second guessing it. We're just using masking tape arbors. They'll work fine. Because I'm using such a small amount of it, there won't be any loss of sensitivity in the rod or through the, plus we got the CCT technology, plus we got the G2 grip, so you could get some graphite arbors and stick them in there, but because we're using such a small amount of tape, it's not going to make that much of a difference. If you notice, I keep measuring. This is very important, just to make sure everything is where it's supposed to be. Because once the arbors are in place, I'm not going to be able to move it around. Pretty good. I might add a little bit more tape, but I'm going to start with that. Get my other arbors on there. Now just keep in mind I keep test fitting these because I don't want them too tight. So I have my arbors in place. I'm just going to snug them up just a little bit by adding a little bit more tape. Now keep in mind in front of this I still have a reference mark on where my spine is. Now we'll put our paste epoxy on here and we're ready to glue up. Now I don't go all the way back because it's going to push epoxy backwards. Okay. And what I need to do is make sure I fill in any gaps and make sure there's plenty of epoxy up here to be pushed back. You're always going to have excess epoxy. Believe it or not, it doesn't take as much as you think it does, but you always put more on because you'd rather have more than less. Spinning the rod around to make sure I get coverage all the way around. Even though I'm spinning the real seat as I install it, I still want to do this to make sure I have good coverage and good adhesion. So what I'm doing here is putting a little epoxy on the inside of this grip, and the reason for that is because I have that winding check, and it's just a little insurance. Not really necessary, but you know what? I want glue everywhere. Wherever there's a mating surface, I want glue. It's just going to hold that much stronger. And because I've already added that trim band and glued it in place prior to ever doing this, makes it real simple. So now I'm getting it in place. I'm going to line up my marks, spin everything around to where it needs to be. And I stand up and look over top of it. That's a good way to get a reference point on your spine. Now we just have to add our little winding check for the front that goes under the unilock hood. Same thing with this, just get it all the way around the rod. There you go. It's all set in place. Your glue up is finished. Now what we need to do is make sure everything's lined up with our spine. We're going to double check our measurements again, and then I'm going to put some tape on the butt cap to make sure that stays on as the epoxy dries. Pulling off my tape. Because I remember to put this winding check on prior to putting on that grip, there was a lot less squeeze out to deal with, so cleanup's going to be much easier. But we're just using rubbing alcohol and a paper towel. So we're going to skewer this butt cap. Clean up anything else, and we're good to go. Guys, I really hope you like this video. Please like and subscribe. I always do how-tos. I also show you some of the builds that I've done. Appreciate you watching. Throw me a like, share my videos. It helps you out a lot. I also want to wish everybody a happy new year. Plus, thank all the people at American Tackle that were able to get me these components super fast and super effectively, and also having the stuff in stock. Here's a few still photos of the finished product. Thanks for watching.